And this afternoon on the marketplace, the IMF has warned that failing to balance the risks from large and growing public and private debt with the risks from premature withdrawal of fiscal support could stall economic recovery. We have more on this as we have economist Professor Peter Korte and former Finance Minister Seth Terkper on standby for the analysis on the fiscal monitor plus other matters regarding Ghana's fiscal standing. Also, President Akufo-Addo reiterates commitments to granting tax exemptions to companies under the One District, One Factory program as leading steel manufacturer B5 Plus opens phase of its steel plant.
Continued commitment to providing strategic support to companies and enterprises operating in Ghana.
Plus, Twitter officially announces its presence of its headquarters of the African continent by launching in Ghana. We will engage an industry player on its implications for Ghana's tech industry. We have all these stories and more coming up shortly after this break. This day. Hello and welcome. My name is Charles Aite. Now, the International Monetary Fund has warned that economies that fail to balance the risks from large and growing public and private debt with the risks from premature withdrawal of fiscal support could have challenges with economic recovery. Of course, Ghana has remained on the low-income bracket of the IMF fiscal monitor since 2017. Now, this classification was no different from the April 2021 fiscal monitor, with the effects of COVID being on a tangent. But how do we solve this? Well, this is what the IMF is proposing, as you could pull it up on your screens, that first of all, there should be a credible medium-term fiscal framework which is critical in attaining balance, setting a path for rebuilding fiscal buffers at a pace contingent on the recovery. Also, this effort could be supported by improving the design of fiscal rules or recalibrating their limits to ensure a credible path of adjustment or legislation such as pre-approving future tax reforms. Also, the IMF says that improving fiscal transparency and governance practices can help economies reap the full benefits of fiscal support. Thankfully, we're joined via Zoom by economist and director of the Institute of Statistical and Social Economic Research, ISA, Professor Peter Korte. Also, do we have the former Finance Minister, Seth Terkper, for this analysis. Gentlemen, we're so grateful that you joined us. I want to start with you, Professor Peter Korte. We know that our ranking of low income under the IMF fiscal monitor has been the same since 2017. But this time around, we're getting the report on the back of the ravages of COVID-19. How do you interpret this report?
All right. Good afternoon to your discerning listeners and viewers. I think if you look at the classifications, the World Bank has 4 categories for classifying countries. So they have the low income, they also have the low middle income, the upper middle income, and then high income. The IMF has merged this into 3 categories. So they have the low income, emerging, the middle income, and then the advanced economies. Now, Ghana within the World Bank classification is a low middle income country. Now they have the various limits, the thresholds. If your income per capita income is below $1,036, then you are low income. Then from $1,036 to $4,045, you are a low middle income. With the IMF classification, we have been a low income since I checked from 2015. They have classified us because they merged this low middle income and to the low income category. So there's nothing new in my view. We have been there for the past several years as low income. Now, what the IMF has done is to look at our fiscal data and try to highlight the risk. So they look at our revenue, GDP, expenditure, debt profile, and then even our overall balance as a proportion of GDP. I don't think what we have in the report is different from what you will find in the budget statement. You will notice that our debt GDP ratio is high. You will notice that our expenditure GDP ratio is also higher than our revenue GDP ratio. And so I don't think there is anything new, except for them to re-emphasize the point, the risk that if we don't manage our debt in the medium term, we have a clear strategy for managing our debt, will stand a risk of economic distress. So that for me is the key highlights.
Great. Let me bring in Sir Tekwe, former finance minister. What do you make of this particular debate, sir? Do you have Mr. Tekwe? But Professor Peter Korte, assessing our economic value in terms of GDP and the fiscals, how do we strike the balance?
Well, I think if you look at the pre-COVID era, you will notice we've been doing very well. Our GDP growth has been quite robust and encouraging. If you look at our fiscal figures, it's been within acceptable limits. That is why we even try to stay within the threshold, the fiscal responsibility threshold and the like. Not to say that our revenue GDP ratio has not been the best, although still higher than some African countries. We still have room for improvement. But for COVID, I think if you compare it, you realize 2020 and 2029, if you compare these two periods as well as 2021, you will see some deterioration in our fiscal figures. Even our GDP growth has not been the best. But it's picking up. I think we should focus more on recovery, post-COVID recovery strategies. How do we move back to our pre-COVID era in terms of investing in the critical sectors?
All right.
If we have, this is the time to spend. This is the time to spend in our productive areas so that we can recover quickly from the recession we went into as a result of COVID.
All right, I think we have Mr. Tekwe now joining us via phone. We're grateful that he joined us. We know that our debt situation is over the top, but a projection of 81.5% of GDP, that sounds incredible. But do you actually think that we could get there?
Yes, we are probably over 81 or 82%, and my reason being that we do not know, for example, certain arrears, which has been very much understated, in the budget. Do we know free SHS arrears? And we know that the bailout cost, in actual fact, when you look at it critically, it does not include the energy cost. It includes the banking sector cost. So when you add up all of this, Ghana is probably, the deficit is much higher. But let me recap and say that, the World Bank classification is a premier one that is used, by development, even by development partners. And so to that extent, one can say that, we have not been, downgraded. But I think we have been complacent for some time. And this is my point. The IMF is using 7.2%, or use 7.2% if you look at it in the 19, because they use the 2019 report. This is an Article 4. This is an adjustment that was made. And we refuse to adjust ours at 4.5. Only for us to wake up, doing the media review and increase the 4.5%, to 11%. And if you add bailout costs, it was 13% deficit. And at the time, Moody's and others were warning Ghana, right? So I think it's a wake-up call. The point which I'm making and where I differ slightly from Prof is that, by showing arrears and things as footnotes and estimating them. For example, if you look at the medium term, which the fund is talking about, do you know that in 2023 and 2024, midterm estimates in the budget, arrears are zero. And that is how the government says that it is going to attain 5%. Going back into 5%. There is no country where arrears can ever be zero. It means that you have stopped awarding contracts, you have stopped, approving contracts that have been completed, and that. Now we are at 80%. Where did we come from? Yes, it is true that the IMF classification has always been there, but the warning signals are there. Let me make 2 points quickly. First, we have come from 57%. That is, even if you allow for the end March exchange rate that was used to calculate the 2016, debt, 57% to 80% plus. And we are confident. We shouldn't be confident, in this regard at all. I think it's a wake-up call. It is something which we have to. The other point that we need to emphasize is that Ghana cannot use parameters that are different from the best practice that is used. That is, And so, if we continue to underestimate and put things in footnotes only to be adjusted, we would one day wake up to realize that we have, a debt that is higher, much higher than we are being told. Fiscal indicators that are much higher than we are being told. Now, the other point I'd like to make is that, yes, COVID has had an impact, and we should not underestimate it. But I have always been urging that if you look at Article 4 and you look at the RCF report, Ghana had a fiscal gap of about 5 to 7% that had nothing to do with COVID. In fact, at the time we had told the World Bank, the IMF and the World Bank, when we got the $1 billion, dollar facility, that the gap on account of COVID was only 2.3%, 2 to 2.3%. So if you added the 2.3% to the 4.5% that the government projected, that is about 7%. So what accounted for the adjustment in the fiscal, in the media review to 11% and 13%? There are 4 items. There are 1, wages adjustments which have been made. 2, there are interest payments adjustments that were made. 3, there are amortization that was underestimated, and 4, it is a bailout cost. These are the reasons, and these are things which have been lingering since 2017. And therefore, for example, 2017, there was no provision for bailout costs at all. So I would urge that we are dispassionate. We look at the numbers. Let's talk to the numbers. Let's talk to the facts. And you will realize that, much of what is being attributed to COVID has nothing to do with COVID at all.
We get your point. We get your point clearly, Mr. Tekpe. We get your point clearly. But in wrapping up in just a minute, I'm going to distribute 30 seconds to each one of you. I want to start with you, Professor Peter Korte. The IMF is really much heavy on the need for fiscal transparency. How do we ensure this moving forward in the medium to long term? 30 seconds, please.
Transparency is key, and that's why we have the key institutions that will ensure that we are transparent with our expenditure. We perform expenditure tracking as much as possible, and the use of digitization, in my view, would highlight most of these areas. If we can, at the click of a button, have real-time data, that will help in our transparency.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Peter Korte, for joining us. He's the director of ISEP and an economist in that regard. Mr. Tekpe, finally with you, 30 seconds. How do we ensure fiscal transparency? You've been finance minister before. How can we ensure this?
We should just go back and use the IMF's own GFS, Ghana Government Fiscal Statistics. We should go back and use IFSAS. These are well-known standards, and those are what the IMF is using to adjust our 4.5% to 13% and to probably 15%.
All right.
If we want information at our fingertips, it is GIFMIS. Let us go back to GIFMIS. Let us go back to the Revenue Modernization Program and get data to manage the economy. These have stalled for some time now.
Mr. Tekpe, we're so grateful that you joined us. Thank you very much. Mr. Tekpe is former finance minister, but in studio is Charles Nixon. He is an editor for Joy Business for some few clarifications. Of course, with the report that we issued out, matters regarding downgrading classification, if you could kindly, clarify the standing of the reportage.
Well, let me be specific. We did not say downgraded. What we sought to report was that Ghana has been classified as a low-income developing country per the IMF Fiscal Monitor. And the IMF Fiscal Monitor specifically is based on the fiscal numbers, i.e. debt to GDP, financing gap. You talk about the difference between expenditure revenue, primary balance, which has to do with the difference between revenue and expenditure, excluding interest payments. So specifically, IMF is sending a signal that our fiscal state is not good. The World Bank uses the per capita income to GDP to classify an economy. And like Professor Peter Corti explained, they have 4 categories. The IMF has 3 categories. And the IMF classifies us as a low-income developing economy. The World Bank says we are a lower middle income country. So there is nothing to be worried. We reported as it is.
Looking at the fiscal.
Exactly. There is nothing like a mischief in terms of our reportage. We were accurate. So that is the issue.
Thank you very much, Charles Nixon. It's important that we made this particular clarification clear. You're still watching The Marketplace. Now to a very interesting story on Twitter. But before that, we take a short break. We'll be right back this day. And welcome back to The Marketplace. Now, Twitter CEO Jack Patrick Dorsey has officially announced the presence of a Twitter headquarters on the African continent by launching in Ghana. Now, breaking the news on Twitter, the Twitter CEO thanked President Akufo-Addo for opening the doors of the billion-dollar company. Let's pull out some of the tweets. Of course, it stated that Anchor continues re-endeavor as a champion for democracy. Ghana is a supporter of free speech, online freedom, and the open internet, of which Twitter is also an advocate. And of course, Jack on his Twitter page with President Akufo-Addo responding to that particular gesture by Twitter, stating the fact that this will mean so much for Ghana's development. But why Ghana? Why did Twitter choose to have Ghana as its hub for the African headquarters? Once again, we have a slide for you that explains the reason why Twitter chose Ghana, of which it cites the matter of Ghana being a supporter of free speech, online freedom, and open internet, of which Twitter is also an advocate. Also, Ghana's recent appointment to host the Secretariat of the Continental Free Trade Agreement area, among others. But let's put all these into perspective, especially when so many of our techpreneurs out there are just biting their nails, just hoping to cash on to this particular initiative. Thankfully, we joined via Zoom by Amel Deborah. He's a techpreneur, and he's going to help us understand what this means for techpreneurs around the country. Amel, thank you very much for joining us on The Marketplace. What impact will this have on Ghana?
Well, I think we've seen over the years how impactful Twitter has been in the social media space. We can tell it's quite different from the other 2 main platforms like Instagram and Facebook.
Exactly.
It's good. It's been a good platform for us for people to find information, what is happening, and its ability to let people be in the trends and know what is trending is something that still puts that platform ahead and separates it from what the rest look like or operate within. So to have them be physically present in Ghana, it is something that is good. I think it should bring about more access. When you have a complaint to make, maybe now there's a better channel to go through. When you want to do advertising, there's a better way to go through, because Twitter advertising has not been the easiest. Unlike Instagram, Facebook, where anybody can just put up their debit card or whatever and key in and use targeting on Twitter. It has on those platforms. Twitter hasn't been so easy.
Wow.
So their presence in this space perhaps would eliminate some of those difficulties with which users face when they need these interactions with Twitter.
All right, so before I let you go shortly, even as Twitter establishes a regional office in Ghana, there remain issues faced by Ghana's social media, issues regarding erratic internet connectivity, data protection, and even internet infrastructure. How much does this inform you as a techpreneur?
Well, I think they wouldn't need so much of these things to operate because their structures are already in place, and so they wouldn't need all of these things to operate any differently than what they already do. And I think as a business, they'll be more keen on strategic partnerships with governments, with agencies, with business people, so that they see what they can do in terms of business and everything else they stand for in this space. So I think a lot of it is already in place, and it wouldn't be so difficult for them to operate as they already do, even if they come to Ghana.
All right, we see how it goes. Mayor Deborah, we're so grateful that he joined us. He's a celebrity blogger and techpreneur in that regard. Before we leave, President Akufo-Addo has reiterated his commitments to supporting companies under his much-touted One District, One Factory initiative with tax exemptions. According to him, this will provide sustainable jobs for the teeming youth in the country. He was speaking at the grand opening ceremony of Phase 1 of the B5 Plus steel plant in the Ngo Pram Pram constituency here in Accra.
The 76 factories operating under this initiative have so far employed some 139,000 people who hitherto would have been at home twiddling their thumbs with no hope in sight. When all I1DF, 1D, 1F projects come on stream, we expect some 258,000, 85,000 more Ghanaians to get direct jobs. Clearly, this policy has the potential to absorb many more young graduates into well-paying, sustainable jobs within their district, municipal, or metropolitan areas. What we're witnessing here today in Lac Blikou is a true reflection of the benefits of the 1D, 1F policy. That is the creation of thousands of direct and indirect jobs and the expansion of value addition activities in the country. It is gratifying to note that the companies converting scrap metal gathered from across the country into building materials, which is feeding the construction industries in Ghana and the ECOWAS region. Government's agenda of import substitution, export diversification, and the industrial transformation agenda is being supported significantly by B5 Plus Limited. I want to reiterate government's continued commitment to providing strategic support to companies and enterprises operating in Ghana. We will continue to enhance the existing incentive framework designed to make 1D, 1F designated companies more competitive and sustainable. The incentives, which include tax holidays, import duty waivers, and interest rate subsidies, are designed to help build the capacities and competitiveness of these enterprises and to position them for greater productivity and efficiency.
Akufo-Addo there. That's how we end this edition of The Marketplace. For more news, log on to myjoyonline.com/business on everything business related. My name is Charles Aite. Enjoy the rest of our programs.